Welcome back. I'm Patrick Pallas, and I'm excited to tee off this next section. It's a plenary on decision science for bar leaders. I think a lot of times as bar leaders, we find ourselves in a place where we have to make tough decisions. And wouldn't it be nice if we had a process on which to go through those steps to make sure we're getting to a reasoned, logical, smart decision? So for that purpose, we've invited an expert on decision science. And let me introduce you to Nika Kabiri. Nika is a lawyer, but she's also a PhD in sociology who focused on choice theory and decision-making within constraints. And I know, what does all that mean? You'll find out, because we're gonna talk about it all. It's not just pretty fancy words. She currently teaches decision science at the University of Washington. She's a consultant who helps businesses understand consumer decision-making. She is a co-author, and I want to brag a little bit. Here, whoop, I'll get it. Maybe I won't get it. I'm holding a book right here. There it is. There's her book. Nika is a co-author of a best-selling book called Money Off the Table, Decision Science and the Secret to Smarter Investing. And I talked about that a little bit, Nika, on during our between plenary discussions, that maybe you'd make us a little smarter about our investments during the workshop today. She's also been featured as in many leading business and political news sources, including Business Insider, Yahoo News, Fast Company. She's a regular contributor to The Hill, Inside Source, The Huffington Post, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of them. She's done a lot. She's an amazing speaker. You can find out more about her and about what she does at yournextdecision.com. For today, Nika's here to teach us how to make better, smarter decisions as bar leaders, as lawyers, and importantly, as humans. Nika, welcome to the National Conference of Bar Presidents and the main stage. It's a pleasure to have you. The show is all yours.
Thank you, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to this talk today, mainly because, as Patrick said, decision-making is not easy. If you are at all self-aware, you realize this. We feel oftentimes that mistakes are always around the corner, or potential mistakes. We carry regret with us everywhere we go. And if you don't believe this to be true, well, all you have to do is Google Florida man. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Florida man. Florida man is not any particular man. It's not one man, but he's a kind of a special type of man. If you have any familiarity with Florida man, it's kind of a term that's used to describe to a particular type of person who makes a particular type of decision. Here's one example of Florida man. Florida man gets tired of waiting at the hospital, steals an ambulance, and drives home, right? It's just one brilliant move that Florida man decides to make. Here's another brilliant move. Florida man is attacked during a selfie with a squirrel, right? Not quite the types of decisions that a lot of us would make. Florida man, that is the kind of decision he would make. One more, just for kicks. Thousands of gun owners in Florida planning to shoot down Hurricane Irma. Now, these aren't the most brilliant of decisions, and I hope that most of us don't make decisions like this, but these are great examples of decision-making gone wrong. And the truth is, even though we may not rise to the level of error of Florida man, we all make bad decisions sometimes. We all have regrets. How do we get it right? That's really the ultimate question, not just for bar presidents, but for all of life, in your relationships, in even just in deciding what car to buy, right? How do you make the right decision? Well, my job is helping people get it right. And I do it in a number of different ways. I work directly with people. I teach at the University of Washington, and I'm also a consultant for businesses and for people. I have people come to me asking for help about career choices, relationship decisions. I write, as Patrick mentioned, I have a book on decision science and investing. I've also contributed to various news publications and blogs and media outlets. And I also talk to reporters from time to time about decision science applied to business, to finance, even to sports. That's just my jam. This is what I do. I've done this for 20 years, and that's why I'm here. I'm here to help you all get it right. And fortunately for you, I have a very simple 4-step process that will help you make all the right decisions. And I'm going to cover that in like just a few minutes right now. So easy peasy, right? Well, let's go through them really quick. First of all, in order to make really good decisions, you have to have perfect information, right? A good decision is always rooted in good information, and a great decision is rooted in perfect information. What perfect information really means from an economics point of view is knowing all your potential options, all potential outcomes, forecasting perfectly. So that's it. Pretty easy, right? Perfect information, not that hard. You also need perfect rationality. Your brain needs to function sort of like a computer. It has to be able to weigh the pros and cons efficiently, but also accurately, precisely. It shouldn't miss anything. It shouldn't shortcut in any way or short circuit. It's got to be perfectly rational, right? Not a problem, right? You also have to be able to have a perfect assessment of value. What that means is that with every decision you make, you need to be able to assess how valuable every potential outcome is, because if you can't do that, then you can't necessarily weigh the pros and cons well and know which outcome you should select. So this is really easy when you're looking at money or financial decisions. If somebody were to offer me $25 or $10, $25 is clearly much more money or more money than $10. And so it's easy to kind of assess the value of that. But if you're trying to assess the value of let's say taking on one client versus another, it starts to become a little bit more difficult. But all you have to do is get that down perfectly and you should be fine. And finally, the fourth very important component of making great decisions is to have perfect insulation. What I mean by that is to be perfectly protected from the social influences that are in your life. So if groupthink is an issue, you would be completely insulated from that. If personal pressures from friends or family are an issue, all you have to do is be perfectly insulated from that, okay? Now that's it. 4 steps, like I said, really easy, not a problem. But no, that's not right. It is a problem. There is really very little indication that we can successfully do all of these things as human beings. And here is why. First of all, we don't have access to all the information that we need when we make decisions, obviously. And the most perfect example of this, or the really great way of illustrating this, is that we can't look into the future, right? We can't see or predict what's going to happen a year from now or 6 months from now with perfect precision. But we also don't know what's going on around us very perfectly. We don't really know what's going on in the heads of our colleagues or members of our bars. We might know some, but we don't have access to all of it. It's not perfect. We're also not perfectly rational. Our brains prioritize efficiency. It takes a lot of energy for your brain to process information, to function the way it does. So much energy that the brain has actually developed to preserve that kind of energy, because then the rest of the body wouldn't work, right? To preserve that fuel, it has to take shortcuts. It has to kind of make concessions. So it can't really be perfectly rational because perfect rationality takes up too much energy. And we have to be efficient in order for our entire systems, our entire bodies to function. We also are at the mercy of social and emotional influences that interfere with what matters. So objectively, rationally, we might be able to kind of assess the value of one client over another, for instance. But social pressure, even firm pressure, or how we feel about our clients or how we feel about the work that we need to do could bias us, sway us, influence us, and force us to see value where it isn't, and force us to devalue things that might actually be in our own benefit and actually be of value to us. And finally, if you can be perfectly insulated from your social environment, then, I don't know what's happening here. sorry about that snafu. If you can be perfectly insulated from your social environment, then you're probably not a human being. We are social creatures by nature. Our social environments are going to sway us. So our need for belonging, our need for other resources that people can offer us, absolutely necessary for us to get by in life. So we're going to be swayed by our social environments. So in a nutshell, what I'm really saying here is that everything we need to do to make really great decisions are psychological, emotional, and social contexts they're going to get in the way of that. In a way, it's as if we're set up for failure, but we're not. There's hope yet. And the reason why I'm saying this is because there is a way to get on top of our influences, to be aware of our influences and adjust for them. So the rest of this talk is really about sharing with you different hacks that can be applied in your everyday life or in your role as a bar president to help you adjust for these influences, these biases, these things that get in the way of great decision making. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a specific decision, step by step, and break down the steps of what you have to do in order to make the right choice in this particular example. And as we go through each step, share with you some of the more common influences that lead you in the wrong direction. And the decision that we're going to focus on is one that we're all hopefully really familiar with, obviously. And that was, at one point, the decision to go to law school. We all were faced at one point with deciding, should I go or should I go? Now, should I not go? For some of us, that decision was very easy. For some of us, it was almost a no-brainer. For others, we might have struggled a little bit. But we were all faced with that choice. And so I want you to kind of go back, something we all can relate to, go back in time and remember that moment when you had to decide. You had to make that choice. Should I go to law school? Now, when you think about making a decision, the first step that you have to take is actually controlling that decision. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Oftentimes, we are faced with a choice and we act immediately. We might act automatically to make a decision without controlling it. And we can see that decision sort of get away from us. One way we do this is by acting on impulse. So emotions, impulse, what psychologists call hot states, which are states of emotional arousal. It could include excitement, they could include fear. These states often cause us to jump to a choice without even going through the process at all. So faced with a decision to go to law school, we might use our emotions or we might use our impulse to make that choice. And we do that, with dieting. I do that all the time. I plan to have grilled chicken and vegetables for dinner on impulse. Before even deciding, I jump for that pizza, right? We don't even stop to choose. We sometimes just act on impulse. So to short circuit that, the question I'd like to ask you all is, are you letting your gut or your emotions call the shots? Now, I'm going to slow down here because a lot of people are firm believers in making gut decisions. They're firm believers in listening to your feelings and letting your feelings drive your emotions. But I'm here to tell you that feelings are not facts, and your gut emotions may not always be in service of your decision. So let's just kind of talk through that for a minute. But first, I just want to show you some results from a survey. Before you guys came to this talk, Beth had sent out to you all a survey to take. And in that survey, which is one I designed, we asked you a bunch of questions. And one of the interesting findings from that survey is that 50% of you in that survey said you use your gut when you make decisions. Now, that might work for you, that might not work for you. 78% of you, however, consider yourselves highly strategic decision makers. This looks a little better to me. 38% of you say you do both. Now, I don't really quite know how you can be strategic and use your gut, but needless to say, our guts seem to play a big part in our decision making, and we have to be very careful about when we employ our guts in making choices. Like I said, some people are very firm believers in following their gut. Others are not. What I'm here to tell you is you have a choice when to use your gut and when not to, and you should control that choice. Sometimes gut decisions lead us to great outcomes. Sometimes our feelings are what lead us to finding the love of our life and having a really happy life with them. But sometimes our gut decisions also lead us in the wrong direction. Sometimes they force us to go to leave the hospital, steal an ambulance, drive home. Impulse can go either way. We have to be very careful about when we use one or the other. We have to control the decision to use our gut. So in a way, whether or not to use your gut is a decision you have to make before you make your choice. If you don't make this decision to control your decision, you can't give yourself the best shot possible, because sometimes outcomes with gut driven, that are driven by your gut, sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. Being in control sets you up for the best chances. And that's really all you have, is the possibility of having the best shot possible. There are no guarantees that your outcome will be exactly as you want it to be. Now, another way in which our guts or our feelings get in the way is when they kind of hold us back from actually making a choice. A lot of us experience analysis paralysis from time to time, if not on a regular basis. We may sit and perseverate and go over our decision over and over again. We may even put it off completely or put it off for a while because we have an emotional reaction to making that decision. So research in psychology has shown that this idea or this experience of indecision or choice deferral stems from anticipatory regret. And what I mean by anticipatory regret isn't the regret you feel after you make your choice. It's the regret you think you're going to feel after you make your choice while you're making your choice. And a lot of times we actually make a choice because the decision that we make is one that will lead us to the least amount of regret. This is anticipatory regret driving our decision making. We are so worried about what we're going to regret in the future that we keep putting things off. So in this sense, emotions, feelings, our gut feelings that we sometimes trust and rely on could lead us astray. So the hack is to ask yourself this question. When you're making your decision, do you feel stalled by the fear of regret or the fear of blame? Because if you sense any of that emotional stuff come up, if you sense that you're worried about others blaming you, shaming you, judging you for making the wrong choice, then you're already letting your emotions drive you in the wrong direction. If you're worried about regret, you're already letting your emotions drive you in the wrong direction. Now, pulling this back to real life for a second, let's put this in the context of relationships, which we can all relate to, right? A lot of us are in relationships. I'm not really familiar with your relationships in this room, but a lot of people in the world find themselves in relationships that aren't fulfilling, that aren't satisfying. And this feeling of anticipatory regret can drive their decision to not decide, to just shortcut the decision altogether, because they're worried about regretting the breakup. What if I never find anybody better? What if my friends blame me for making the wrong decision? So this is a really great example of how emotion or anticipatory regret can play out in our everyday lives, even when we're in a relationship that really is not in our best interest. And the same thing can apply to working as a bar president, right? The role that you have even as a lawyer. Sometimes we let that fear of regret drive the decision making, and we have to ask, are we letting regret or are we letting that fear of blame do the work? In the survey that I sent you all, 29% of you said you worry about regret when you're faced with a hard choice. So this is 1 in 3 of you who have this emotional response. Very human, no judgment here. I feel it all the time. We have to constantly work hard to override this emotional response, right? We have to work very hard at it. 31% of you say you worry about blame. Again, not uncommon. It's very human. We just have to be aware and we have to override it. So the question is, should you use your gut? When should you use your gut? if you're going to control that decision to use your gut, how do you do that? How do you make that choice? Well, there are three things that you probably need to think about in deciding whether or not your feelings or your gut are the way to go. The first is time. I don't think it's very common for a lot of us to ask ourselves before we make a choice, how much time do we really have? I find it very uncommon in my life to even ask this question. And I know that I have to ask this question. It's just not an automatic thing that comes up. But if you start your decision right off the bat by asking this question, how much time do you have? Then you can know whether your gut feeling needs to drive or whether you need to do the cost benefit analysis of strategic thinking. Because in order to be strategic and exercise that cost benefit analysis, you need time. You need time to gather information. You need time to estimate likelihoods. We'll talk all about this in a minute. If you don't have the time, then you might need to move faster than you probably would, and you might need to go with your gut. So think about how much time you have. But also, if you have time, you don't want to rush. If you don't have time, you don't want to belabor it either. You don't want to drag it on past the time that is appropriate. So be very wary of that time box. The second hack has to do with stakes. To really ask yourself, how serious would the consequences be if you got it wrong? Sometimes we imagine the regret and blame as a very serious consequence if we got it wrong. But what I'm really asking you to focus on here is not those emotional consequences, but the consequences of your actual decision. How high of a stakes decision is this choice that you're about to make? How serious would the consequences be? If you're the president deciding to go to war, we're talking about a high stakes situation. If you're trying to decide what to feed your kids for dinner, if you get it wrong, it's not going to be a high stakes situation. Why are you spending so much time making that kind of decision? Use your gut, go with your feeling, roll some die. It doesn't really matter. And then finally, there's this issue of reversibility, which we often don't ask enough when we're about to make a decision. Some choices have greater lock-in power than other choices. Some decisions, once you make them, you can reverse them, you can take them back. Other decisions are not that easy to reverse. If you get married and have a mortgage with someone, it's really hard to reverse that decision. If you just decide to live in your own spaces and date for a while, it's easier to reverse that decision. It's the same in decisions that we make as bar presidents. Some choices we make, we can take back and reverse, and others we can't. Investigate just briefly how reversible that is. And if it's not reversible, if it has great lock-in power, if it's going to lock you into a path that you may not want, you might need to take more time making that decision. All right. So first step was control your decision. What's the second step? Identify your best options. Now, everybody knows this is the first, right? A really important part of decision making. Your options are the choices. You either go to law school or you don't go to law school. But there's a problem with just jumping to that and calling it. And that is what behavioral economists like Daniel Kahneman and Thinking Fast and Slow have pointed to as this concept of WYSIWYG, which is the idea that our brains automatically assume that what we see is all there is to see. That we have an inability to identify what we don't know. Now, you and I sitting here, we could have a conversation. And if I said to you, you know, you don't know everything, right? You'd probably say, yeah, you're right. I don't know everything. But the problem is that when you're forced to make a decision, that realization, because of our brain's efficiency, because of its need to come to a conclusion quickly, just forgets about this. So we have to do a lot of work to override this. So rather than asking what we know, sorry, I'm not sure why these slides are, we have to ask what we don't know, right? What is it that we may not really know? Are we only considering options that come to mind? Are we only considering options that are in front of us? Or are we considering options, or are we considering to investigate other options? And I kind of listened in on the conversation before this talk, and there was a lot of talk about doing research, gathering data. I think Bridget mentioned this in her comments, like, let's go out and do this work. And this is exactly the kind of hacking that solves for Wizziati. It's not asking, what do I know? And starting from there to make the decision. It's asking, what do I need to know? That's the critical question. What do you need to know in order to make that decision? And then try to understand how much of what you need to know you actually already possess and how much you don't. And then you can go out and find what you don't know. Social norms also play a part in helping us identify the right options. Sometimes we only see options that are in front of us. We only see options that are in front of us because our social norms, the rules of society, tell us what's in front of us. Social norms are mores. They're the shoulds and shouldn'ts of life. If we think about driving down the road, we all have to abide by the same norms, or else we would have accidents all the time. There are certain norms in the workplace, certain things you should do, and there's certain things you should not do. If we don't adhere to these norms, then there could be chaos in the workplace. So norms are not a bad thing, but sometimes norms get in the way. Sometimes we can actually break the norms and we don't know that we can. And to illustrate this, I want to introduce you to a guy named Rodney Mullen. If you don't know Rodney Mullen, he's known as the godfather of modern street skating. This guy is not just like the Michael Jordan of skating. He actually invented a whole type of skating. He innovated on a sport. So if you imagine the creation of an entire sport, it takes quite a bit of innovation. It takes quite a bit of thinking outside the box, not assuming you see all there is to see, not following social norms, but actually breaking some of them. And to illustrate how he did this, I'm going to show you a quick video. So I'm going to put myself on mute for a second.
Nika, we're not hearing your sound, so you'll need to go back and reshare and check the little box to share sound.
It might be because you've muted yourself.
Okay, I will give me a minute and I will try to bring the share up. Hang on, Nika. We'll be right with you. Everyone just be patient for a second. Technical difficulties. We'll get there. Well, Nika, do you want to just continue and I will pull it up and I'll let you know when I have it up and then I can show it. You need to unmute yourself, Nika.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to talk through it. That's what I'll do. Can you see my full screen? No, not yet. Hold on.
There we go. Now we hear it.
You can hear that? Okay, awesome. Then let's play it. Let me share it. Whoops. Just when I thought I was an expert at this, I'm surprised. Okay. Can you see the screen now in the video?
Try playing it again.
Yeah.
There we go.
So
there was a skater that I was sponsoring at the time from Florida named Tim Scroggs, and he called me and said, you must see this 13-year-old kid in Florida named Rodney Mullen. And he encouraged me to bring Rodney out to this contest.
We went to the contest, and I remember seeing all these guys that I looked up to in the magazines, and I was just the retarded kid in all the pads.
For the rest of us, it was more like, doing different wheelies or manual variations and some handstand tricks. And that was freestyle at the times.
I remember I did my run, and I remember looking at the judges, and they were looking at my board and not me.
It was on a whole nother level. When I first seen him skate, I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Most people get on a skateboard, they stand on the deck, and they remain on the deck. Rodney looked at the board and went, I can ride every side of this. I can ride the nose standing up, I can ride the tail standing up, I can ride it upside down, I can ride on the edge.
So I did my run. So they gave me scores that, whoa, they put me in first place. And I remember driving back, and I had this trophy going, I don't think I deserve this, but I did what I did. I did what I meant to do.
So now I'm concerned the video quality wasn't that great. Did you guys see the video okay? Was it smooth? Okay. The reason why I showed you this, regardless of your opinions about street skating or skateboarding, was that Rodney Mullen was able to see beyond what everyone saw, right? Everyone saw the deck of the board. Everyone saw the surface. That was all there was that they saw. And the norms were just, let's do tricks on the surface, on the deck. Because he was able to see past what he assumed, right? See past the basic general assumptions that everyone else made, he was able to innovate on an entire sport. And the point for us here is that in order to really innovate in legal, in order to really innovate as bar leaders, we have to assume that we don't see everything there is to see, and we have to kind of break the rules a little bit. The rules that are worth breaking. Now, some rules are worth breaking and some aren't. Remember traffic rules? They're worth breaking? No, they're not worth breaking, but others are. So in the case of going to law school, these could be two options, but there could be other options too. Maybe not some that your parents might have liked, or maybe not options that were normative. In this case, this is not a non-normative decision, but it's definitely one that I wish I thought about more before I went to law school. So you have to think about a little bit beyond just the norms. And again, you don't want to break norms that are going to be disruptive. You don't want to break rules that are going to cause more problems than not, like in the case of traffic. But you should think a little bit beyond what is expected. Now, the third kind of hack, the third step in making a decision is to identify possible future conditions. So what a condition is certain potential outcomes or certain potential situations that can emerge from each decision. So if you're making a decision to go to law school, you could either go or not go. Now, the condition would be the what ifs. What if you go to law school and you land a high-paying job that you like? That's one condition. That could happen. What if you go to law school and you end up in a low-paying job you don't like? That could happen. That's another condition. And in fact, these conditions hold true for whether you go or don't go. Same conditions. Now, the thing that happens when we try to predict conditions, when we try to predict the what ifs, is there's this illusion that we can predict them all. And that's called the illusion of knowability. That it's possible to know all there is to know about the future of our decisions. So the hack there is to really ask yourself, what is possible to know? So rather than just diving in and understanding or trying to understand the breadth of what's out there, identify what you need to know, but is it possible to know? And this will help you drive those decisions forward a little bit better. For instance, we can make fun of Florida man all the time for being attacked during a selfie with a squirrel, but how could he have foreseen this, really? Like, is it knowable? Is it knowable to have predicted this particular condition? And regarding law school, was it knowable for many of us when we graduated that the economy would not be favorable to us? Some of these things we could know, and some of these things we may not know. It's really important to ask ourselves, what is knowable? Fourth step is estimating the likelihoods of future possible conditions or possible future conditions. What do I mean by likelihoods? It's not enough to just ask yourself, what if I got a high-paying job I liked? What if I got a low-paying job I didn't like? You also need to ask, what are the chances? What are the chances that you are going to be in a high-paying job that you like? What are the chances that you would end up in a bad job that you don't like? You have to estimate the likelihoods, because if there's a very, very, very low likelihood that you would land a high-paying job that you like, then suddenly your decision becomes very, very different than if there was a high likelihood of that. Accurately calculating the chances is really, really important. But there's a problem that emerges in doing that. And this is, again, what behavioral economists call the availability heuristic. The availability heuristic it basically states that we judge the future outcome or a future likelihood of outcomes based on events that we easily recall in our brain. So the question you have to ask yourself to avoid this issue or problem is to ask yourself if you're relying only on available memories to tell you how likely something is. If you're only relying on recollection, if you're only sitting there thinking, well, for instance, I recall hearing about a plane crash and it was really tragic about a month ago, and I'm about to get on a plane. So I'm really worried that I'm going to get in a plane crash because the likelihood of that crash seems really high. Well, the likelihood is no higher than if you had never heard about that other plane crash. But because that situation, that event is memorable to you, the brain tricks you into thinking that that likelihood is higher, that the likelihood of some catastrophe is higher. Now, this is also true with a lot of things. In fact, my mom is really guilty of doing this. She will often hear something on the news, I don't know, mudslide near Seattle or some traffic jams near, someplace in the city that I live in. And she is suddenly inundated with this concern that the likelihood of my getting trapped in a mudslide is really high, or my getting trapped in a traffic jam or some sort of terrible situation or shooting is really high, when statistically speaking, the likelihoods of these things are very low. Now, I just want to share with you another video. This is kind of a humorous video sort of illustrating what I mean by this, the way that we remember catastrophes or we remember things happening can shape the sense of how likely we think they're going to be in the future. So please tell me if you can see and hear this.
The world is a dangerous place. From natural disasters to gun violence and war, tragedy could strike at any time. It's important to stay informed so you can stay safe. What if there was an app that warned you about emergencies? With up-to-the-minute notifications to keep you out of harm's way. Introducing Mom Alert, breaking news on the biggest threats from a team of moms with their fingers on the pulse.
I can get back to my journaling now.
Salmonella outbreak in Italy. Dirty shrimp. Please stay safe.
Just plug in your location to start getting updates about emergencies within the radius of the entire Earth. You can even customize your preferences by type of tragedy, and then continue to receive alerts about all of them, no matter what you pick.
I was all set to go on my honeymoon in Italy. Then Mom Alerts told me about my cousin being robbed in Toronto one time. I dodged that bullet.
I travel a lot for work. On a recent trip to Colorado, Mom Alerts reminded me about John Benet Ramsey. Thank God.
If it wasn't for Mom Alerts, I wouldn't know about my mom's friend Jody's son, the one who went to Tufts. He got his moles checked. He's fine.
Our moms are working around the clock, ready whenever, wherever, to send you instant alerts as soon as the news breaks, and delayed warnings that come several years later about something they kind of remember. Life or death news alerts the way you want them, sandwiched between cryptic, mundane updates about other things. And sign up for Mom Alert Premium to hear audio warnings with even more detail.
But I read that it has a bad battery or something. I don't remember. And it exploded in someone's mouth. Blew up their whole head or something like that. It's a lawsuit. Did you see this? Anyway, just calling to make sure that you don't have that toothbrush.
Thanks, Mom Alerts.
And coming soon, Dad Alert.
Hey, buddy.
It's just this message. Twice a day, nothing else.
So this is just a humorous illustration of the availability heuristic in action, how we anticipate likelihoods based on this bias. Sorry.
From natural disasters to gun violence.
And when the decision to go to law school probably came up for you, you might have looked at other examples or looked to your brain. I know I did, looked into my recollections for examples of people that I knew who liked law school and people who might have hated law school or hated being a lawyer. I really only looked at people that I knew. The better way to go is to look at statistics or data to estimate future likelihoods of things. In the survey that I sent you all, 33% of you said you use statistical analyses when making choices. My hope is that this will be much higher in the future, because only by looking at likelihoods and statistics will you know how to predict some outcome from happening or some condition from happening. If you only rely on your memory, you're likely to get on the wrong track. The fifth step is identifying possible outcomes given each condition. Now, an outcome is basically what will happen if each condition holds for each option. If you go to law school, for instance, and you have a high-paying job you like, you could be happy about having it all. If you have a low-paying job you don't like, you could be bummed about being unhappy and in debt. And you can see these other outcomes playing out if you don't go. If you could have landed a high-paying job you like, but you didn't go to law school, you could be bummed about missing out, or relieved to have avoided a bad situation if you didn't go and you would have had no real job prospects. So those outcomes are sort of what you need to estimate or arrive at in order to make the really strong decision. However, our brains, again, play tricks on us, and we see connections between things that may not exist. This is part of the efficiency of our brain. Behavioral economists call this attribution error, where we see two things happening at the same time. X is happening, Y is happening, and because they're happening at the same time, our brains make a connection and assume that X causes Y, when in reality, something else could be causing Y. But we don't look into that and we don't investigate that. Our brains quickly jump to conclusions and attribute one thing to another without investigating beyond that. And a lot of conspiracy theories rest on this rely on this tendency of the brain to see connections. 5G emerged in China. COVID emerged at the same time. There's got to be a correlation there. There's got to be a causal relationship there. That's not necessarily the case. Our brains are just making that connection. It's not necessarily there. The only way to know whether that connection is there is to, again, identify, do the research, identify the causal relationship by using evidence. Now, the decision to go to law school, we may think that law school is what caused the misery that many of the lawyers that we know experience at work, when in reality, there could be another causal relationship or another causal situation going on there. The reason why this, or the way in which this impacts our decision-making, is it causes us to see outcomes emerging from conditions that may not emerge. So landing a high-paying job you like is not a prerequisite or may not be the reason behind your ultimate happiness about having it all. Happiness could be about something completely different. Those causal relationships that we jump to conclusions and make without any evidence could be a problem. Okay, step 6. Not only do you need to identify the possible outcomes, but you also need to identify or assign value to each of the possible outcomes. So for instance, it's not enough to know that you'd be happy about having it all, but you also have to know how important it is to you to have it all. How important is it to you to be bummed out about being unhappy and in debt? So it's a sense of understanding, for instance, how valuable each thing is to you, because if you don't know that, then each option could suddenly seem more or less appealing to you. Unfortunately, again, we have social norms that play a role in assigning value to things beyond our own sense of value. So the question you want to ask yourself here, the hack, is to ask yourself the question whether norms are telling you how valuable things should be to you, or whether you're making an objective assessment of value. How objective is that assessment? Is your social environment imbuing on you the sense of importance of law school? A lot of us go to law school because we assume there's some value in the status of being a lawyer. There's this prestige in being a lawyer. Now, if status and prestige is valuable to you, then that's something you need to think about. But if it's not, if it's just something that's valuable to everyone else, then we shouldn't conclude a high value, assign a high value to that outcome if it's not really valuable to us. So we have to be very careful about the social norms around us dictating value for things. Another thing that also happens is this idea of identity. We often make decisions based on how we want to present ourselves to the world, right? We want to kind of show the world who we are. If you're swayed in your decision-making by what your choices might be regarding who you are, by how it signals to other people who you are, then you could be making a choice that is against your actual best interest for the sake of expressing your identity to someone else. A perfect example of this is in consumerism. A lot of the things that we buy are not necessarily things we might need or that fulfill us or that have real value for us. A lot of the things that we buy are really there to signal to the world who we want them to see us as, who we want to believe we are to them. So spending $300 on a pair of Chanel sunglasses, it's not about having high quality sunglasses. It's often about just signaling to others that you are a fashionista of some sort of high status, right? That's your identity doing the decision making. Sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not okay. I know I was influenced by this identity of being a lawyer. Going to law school meant I could be a lawyer, and that had some value to me. But in reality, the identity of a lawyer is only one component of that benefit, that outcome. The day-to-day work that I had to do, that you all have to do as lawyers, has to be taken into consideration as well. It's not just about how others see you, it's about a lot of other things that give lawyering its value. Being a public servant, I've heard a lot of you talk about that earlier. It really has to, you have to be in control of the way in which your identity is influencing your decision-making. So let's talk about the big takeaways here. The big takeaways from these 6 steps are really all about protecting yourself from undue influence. Again, it's not the case that you don't have what it takes to make, or you don't know how to make the right decisions, because you do. You just have to have perfect information, perfect rationality. You have to have a perfect assessment of value, and you have to be perfectly insulated. But you have to protect yourself from all the influences that keep you from that perfect situation. And first of all, just to recap, control your decision. Don't let emotion and impulse take over and drive your decision making. Emotions, your gut feeling, that's a data point. That's just one consideration. How you feel about your decision is just one aspect of it. There are all these other things that you need to consider, including data and evidence. So first step, stop, slow down, control your decision, ask how much time you have, how high the stakes are, and how reversible your decision is in order to know how much of your gut needs to play a part. Second, instead of asking how knowable, what do I know? You need to ask what do I need to know and how knowable is it? In order to make a choice, there's a certain amount of information that's necessary to do it well. If you don't have all that information, you probably won't do it well. If you think you know it all already, because you're only thinking about what you know, you're going to miss out on all this other information that you don't have. And that's where a lot of regret actually does set in, because you should have known. And sometimes you should have. You just didn't ask, what do I need to know? And a lot of the information that you feel like you need to know is not knowable. So taking all of that time and energy seeking it out may not be efficient, but also being aware of the limits of your knowledge can help you navigate regret later and also help you make the best choices by setting you up for the best chance possible, right? You're not trying to get a perfect outcome. You're trying to set yourself up for the best chance possible of a good outcome. Look beyond your recollections. I have been in many, many contexts, many situations with high-level executives at various companies who, in making decisions, will ask everyone in the room, okay, let's all sit and think about the last time that we succeeded, and let's repeat that. Or I was actually sitting in a room with some of the partners at Madrona Venture Labs, which is a startup lab in Seattle. They spin out lots of startups. And the conversation they had was, well, let's think about all the successful startups that come to mind, Facebook, Twitter, and let's examine what they did right and let's replicate that. Well, if you only look to your recollections, you're not going to actually get the information of all those startups that failed and why they failed. You need a broader set of evidence. You need more information. So look beyond just what's in your head. Do research. Again, back to the conversations I heard earlier today. Gather evidence, do research by asking what you need to know. Next, beware of false connections. Ask yourself, how sure am I that one thing is causing another thing? That there are real relationships between conditions and outcomes. A lot of us see those false connections and we don't even recognize it. It's under the radar because we're human. We're biased, and this is just how it's going to happen. So ask yourself, how sure am I that this connection that I presume is there is actually there? In other words, and I like to say this a lot to the people I consult, there's nothing wrong with self-doubt. Overconfidence is much more dangerous than self-doubt. So be a little doubtful, second guess yourself. That will protect you from making bad decisions. And next, know when you can and should break the norms. Sometimes these social norms are meant to be broken. Sometimes they are able to be broken. Make sure you understand when that is and when breaking the norms is to your benefit. It's okay to go against what's normative if it's going to get you to where you need to go. Just need to think about it. Don't assume that the norms are there to constrain you. They might be there to challenge you. So those are the major takeaways. Now, coming up, I'm going to be leading a workshop. So I hope that you see me there. In this workshop, we're going to go through all the steps of decision-making that I laid out in this deck, in this presentation. And you're going to be given a big decision to make in small groups. And as you're going through the steps of making this decision, I'm going to ask you to go through all those decision hack questions so you can exercise and apply them and really start to understand them. So I hope to see you there. And either way, I'd like to thank you. If you want to know more about what I do, you can go to kabiriconsulting.com. That's where I help businesses make the right choices. Or you can go to yournextdecision.com. That's misspelled, but it's yournextdecision.com if you want to learn more about decision science for life. So thank you all very much. And I guess we have a Q&A now, right?
Good, thank you very much. That's so cool to hear this. I think we all know how we make decisions, but maybe we've never drilled down into it to see what it really looks like. And I don't know about you, but I found myself saying, yeah, I do that. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Oh, I do that. I should do that better. We're going to take some time and get some feedback from others in the audience and take some questions. Let me just ask you while those questions are coming in through our chat, or maybe if someone wants to raise their hand, happy to recognize you and call on you. But let me ask you this. As lawyers, and particularly as bar leaders, it feels sometimes like we have decisions coming at us fast and furiously. Mm-hmm. And to go through all of those steps seems like a real challenge with every decision that comes across our desk as a bar president. I'm wondering what your advice is about finding efficiency, taking the right amount of time for the right sized decision.
This is a great question. I debated whether to cover the answer to that question in this talk. But it's I have limited time. There's so much information out there. Some decisions are what decision analysts will call programmable. In other words, they can be automated. One trick in trying to become more efficient is to identify whether the decisions that come at you a million miles an hour are choices that you make on a regular basis or similar to other choices that you make on a regular basis. If you find yourself having to think through a choice from scratch over and over again, when you've made that choice before, it might be time to actually take a break, take some time and make it programmable, make it automatable or scalable or whatever you want to call it. So setting up some processes for decisions that are frequent could be helpful. And one way to do that is to first identify like a class of decisions, right? Put a scope around the types of decisions you're going to make. So I can't really think of an example that comes to mind that's related to bar presidents because I'm not a bar president. But one thing that this is a great example. I was working with a client on internal requests for research. And something that would happen is people would just bombard them with these requests for research, and they'd have to stop every single time and consider each of these requests and have to make a decision about, are we going to pursue this? Or are we not going to pursue this? So I stepped in and I set up a process. I set up a formal process of an intake process where anyone who comes in would have to fill out a form that has key information. That form would then go through a proposal process. And by doing that, it almost takes the thinking and the decision-making out of it. And you're just kind of going through this step-by-step procedure. The risk of that, if you do that as a bar president, is that over time, that process and procedure could become outdated or useless. So you have to make it a point to go back and check, is the program that you've written for this decision-making process still useful and effective? But even if all you do is identify decisions that are frequent and therefore easily programmable, then you're already in the right mindset, right? Like, okay, I don't have to keep making the same decision over and over again. Other than that, if they aren't frequent, this is where time boxing comes in. This is where you have to just accept you have a time box. And oftentimes time boxes shift the mindset from what psychologists and behavioral economists call from compensatory to non-compensatory benefits. So forget the words, but the point is, when you have a time box on you, the deal breakers pop out. So you're not sitting there weighing the pros and cons and going on and on and on. If somebody told you have 10 seconds to make the decision, your brain will automatically go to the deal breakers. And that tells you what's most important to you. And that can actually make decision-making more efficient. I hope that answers your question.
Well, I love that. And, as you're saying this, I'm thinking my own law firm, like if we set up a decision tree on what cases to take. So every time someone calls in and gives a fact pattern, we know, with some certainty, we take this case, we don't take this case, and it could all be a very good flow using the points that you raise. But that's for another discussion. Kathleen Wilkinson, you've been collecting questions out of the chat. Let me turn over to you a minute. Why don't you hit some of the highlights, the questions that are out there?
Yeah, absolutely, Patrick. And first off, I have to say that people really enjoyed the mom alerts in particular. And one of our officers here was able to put it in the chat. So here's a really good question from Amy Dudas, Indiana president-elect. As bar leaders, our constituents are mostly lawyers. And as we know, since we are among lawyers, her question says that lawyers can be pushy. She would like to know your thoughts on that kind of influence by other lawyers with very strong views and very loud voices.
This is one of those tougher challenges. The reason why this is tough is because those pressures from other lawyers, or even in your life, pressures from spouses or friends or whatever, they really tap into this deep-rooted psychological and sociological need to belong. If we don't go along with the social group, if we don't keep the peace, it's almost this really deep-seated fear of rejection, of isolation. It goes back to like tribal societies where we needed each other to survive. And if we don't placate those that are putting pressure on us to do what they want, our fear of being on our own is intense. So the first step is to recognize that we're not in tribal societies anymore, right? The connections that we have aren't all the connections that we have. There is a deep-seated fear of being rejected, but it's just an emotion. So again, don't let that fear or that emotion drive your decision-making. Temper it with objectivity. Another good strategy for dealing with someone who's pushy is to push back, but in a gentle way with choices. People who push, who want you to do things a certain way, like that sense of they need control, like all of us do. We need control. I get pushy sometimes because I want control. Offering an option or a set of options to someone can give them that control, but architecting those choices so that you will kind of help them see that your way is the best way is how you do that, right? So here's a great example. Student in my class once, his wife wanted to plant some flowers in the house between his home and their neighbor's home. And the neighbor, they suspected, would not want this, would not want those flowers to be planted there, would want to push back, right? Don't do that, we don't want that. So the wife, she, instead of going to the neighbor and having a conversation about whether to plant flowers, went to the neighbor and said, do you want petunias or do you want gardenias? She presented an option where either option would have been fine for her, but he still had that control. Now it's a little bit of mind control, Jedi mind trick kind of stuff, right? But it works. So providing options and architecting those options in a certain way can often alleviate that negative experience that happens when people are pressuring you to do something that you know is not in the best interest of your organization. I hope that helps.
That's great. And that ties in with the other question that just came in from Keith Cutler, who asks, could you discuss the additional layer of analysis that's necessary when you're making decisions on behalf of a bar association as opposed to personal decisions that involve us personally?
This is a very, very interesting topic. There is a lot of research in decision science and decision making that shows that under certain circumstances, when we make decisions for other people, we are, depending on the situation, we are either more or less risk averse than we would be making decisions for ourselves. So, for example, again, I always like to bring it back to personal situations because we all relate and I can talk about them more than I can about bar associations. But I have a client who came to me about relationship advice. She told me that her friends were just telling her, just dump him, just dump the guy, right? Just break up with him. And she was saying, you know, it's easy for them to say, but because they're not in the relationship. And this is a perfect example of how someone who's not in your situation can assess the risks, the pros and cons, the benefits and values of your decision very differently because they don't have skin in the game. So as a bar president, making decisions for other people, how much skin in the game do you have as far as their outcomes go? You really do need to consider it from their point of view. And this is where because you have to override this idea that your sense of risk is going to match their sense of risk, that you're actually going to make decisions the way they would for themselves. That's going to be an automatic assumption. You got to override that. That's where actually talking to the people that you serve and getting a sense of what benefits them, what their values are, what outcomes they'd like to see is really the way to go. That's why research works. I hope that answers that question.
Let me ask you about a couple of common phrases, and I'm curious about you putting them kind of into context with your decision science process. And the two things that come to mind are, Monday morning quarterbacking and making decisions. Well, I can make decisions. I'm in the cheap seats. And it seems to me as I think about these old sayings, Monday morning quarterbacking kind of means you had all the information. So obviously you can make a good decision because you had information others didn't have. And, I'm in the cheap seats means I think I'm not emotionally involved. I can see this a mile away, what's going to happen, what you should do. But I'm just wondering, these kind of social ideas about cheap seats, Monday morning quarterbacking, how do you fit those into your decision science tree?
First of all, I take a deep breath because that drives me nuts. Both of those drive me up the wall. I get this reaction on social media a lot where I'll post something, I'll share an article or I'll share some research and somebody will come along and say, I don't buy that. And they'll cite some reason for not believing what I'm sharing that shows that they know enough, but they show a little, but not enough, right? They know enough to be dangerous, right? Overconfidence bias is a real thing. Overconfidence bias is this notion that your sense of your knowledge or your ability falls short of what you think it does. Like your real ability does not match what you think. There's poor calibration. There is a research study done of college professors, right? College professors who are very, very smart, right? They were asked, compared to your peers, are you better, average, or worse in your job? College professors, right? 95% of them said they were better. Now, 95% statistically can't be better, right? They're average, but it goes to show the power of overconfidence, that you actually evaluate your capabilities as better as they actually are. And the only way to bypass that, again, like I said, is to exercise a healthy sense of doubt. We live in a society where we are taught constantly to have high self-esteem and believe in ourselves and be confident and know what we're talking about. I sometimes wonder if that's detrimental to our ability to make good choices, because unless we can second guess, we can have that humility, we won't do the research and gather the information necessary to actually make the right decisions, and we will not end up in a better position.
Perhaps you've seen this. Malcolm Gladwell is writing a book, if he hasn't already maybe got it out, on this idea of delaying decisions because you're so sure of yourself that your own arrogance prevents you from seeing the decision you should make. And he has a great story about a Civil War general who didn't stop an invasion because we got them surrounded. They can't go anywhere. And I'm the world's greatest general. So we're going to let him just sit there for a bit. And of course, he gets routed, loses the battle, and gets kicked out of his position. And Lincoln replaces him. I'm wondering about how do we identify these own kind of arrogance, perhaps, like you said, these professors, our own arrogance biases, and get those out of the way and recognize they're there.
First step is assume that you are being overconfident, because it's a natural tendency. It's like it's just a natural part of being human. And this is a great story. I love this research. This is another example of research that was done. People who, and you've all experienced this, right? Driving down the road, you almost avoid an accident. I'm such a great driver, I avoided this accident, right? Driving down the road, you get in the accident. Oh, that other guy, how come he got me in this accident, right? It's natural, it's human nature. So the first step is really, I like to exert going through life, whether I'm making a decision or not, going through life, telling myself, I'm going to be overconfident every single moment. I'm going to be overconfident. That is a really healthy first step, because that will remind you of how much you don't know and force you to want to look for more information.
Like that. Thank you. Kathleen, you got another great question for us.
I do. I think there's a number of people in the audience that are interested in hearing more about information overload. Like you, and I know this happens to me. There's just so much information, so much posturing that you just want to shut down, and you'll delay putting the decision or making the decision.
Mm-hmm. Again, another topic I debated putting in this talk, but with limited time, I wasn't able to. There are two things I like to think about when I think about information overload. One is going back to that hack that I brought up in the presentation, which is rather than looking at all the information rather than asking myself, what do I know? It's really helpful to ask, what do I need to know? Like, what do you need to know? Asking yourself that and getting clear on that will help you filter in the data that is relevant and filter out what isn't relevant. I think one of the most useful tools that I have developed in my personal and professional life is being able to tell the difference between what's relevant and what isn't. And it sounds easy and it sounds but it's not that easy, and it takes work. It also takes reminding yourself, is this relevant? Is this what I need to know? And if it isn't, just forget it. Just because information is in your face doesn't mean it matters, right? The second part of this is to recognize that there's a difference between maximizing and satisficing. So in economics, satisficing is really gathering enough information to where any other bit of information you gather suddenly has diminishing returns, right? So your returns on investing in that information gathering starts to go down. If you stop gathering information at that point, you are, according to research, much more likely to be satisfied with your decision and probably going to make just as good a decision as if you kept going on and getting all that information. People who like to get all the information, who continue doing the research, and they're called maximizers, and research shows they are much less happy with their choice. And the margin of error isn't really that much different. So consider how much additional information is really getting you. Like, what's the return on your investment, every additional bit of information that you get?
And there was one further comment that I think we have just about enough time for, and that is, and this came from Jay Silverblatt. I'm sure he doesn't mind I mention he's the president-elect of Pennsylvania Bar, and that is the general public, that they are overly confident about their views, and that there's an overconfidence bias in what we see in the general public who disagree with, say, a jury's decision, a judge's decision. The public has not necessarily heard all the information. And we see this issue come up in other ways too, with, newfound disrespect for judges and lawyers and the whole judicial branch. So can you help us with that type of issue?
And Nika, just a short answer. We have a little bit to do, and I want to make sure we give people time for the survey.
Yes. So this is a really great question. Last night, I taught my my class at the UW. It was a class, and in the middle of class, a bunch of students started complaining to me about the fact that the concepts, there were too many concepts they were learning, they were overwhelmed. And the solution to that wasn't that, or their response to that, their reaction to that wasn't, I need to try harder, I need to study harder, I need to ask more questions. Their reaction was, I know how to structure this class better than you, Nika. So let's take a few moments, half an hour of class time, for us to tell you, Nika, how you should have structured this class, right? Now, I have been teaching for many years. I've won teaching awards. I've never had this happen to me before. There's no evidence that I'm failing in this class, not to mention that half the students were doing a great job and understanding everything, right? It happens everywhere. The only way that I know to combat that is to provide them with information they don't have, because they're assuming they see all there is to see. And offering that information in the form of a choice, because they're lacking control. They want control. They've just lost control, and that uncertainty makes them crazy. So presenting them with options like, okay, students, we can do it your way, but here are the trade-offs. And they're all negative, because I know they're negative, because I know what the heck I'm doing. Or we could do it my way, and here are the trade-offs, and they're probably going to be positive because I know what the heck I'm doing. You decide. You decide. I'm informing you by giving you information in those trade-offs. You decide what the best way to go is. And oftentimes, most of the time, that solves the problem. Sorry.
We have to move on, but I want to thank you. And